Mao himself said some pretty galling things about courting capitalism and welcoming it from the West, although whether that was just diplomacy or a genuine statement of values is up for debate. Um, it's interesting because I have a feature planned. We're still in chat, but I have a feature planned on Kissinger, who, if you will recall, China did some overtures to the West in the Nixon years, and there was definitely some talks with Kissinger about, they were trying to oppose the Soviet Union and thought that they would court the USA, at least to some extent, to do that. And later on, it looks like to a very great extent, until up to today. And I shared this on the community tab a while ago, but here is Xi Jinping. As I said, when you're definitely a communist, thumbs up. Yes, that was sarcastic. This is a story, I think, from Reuters. Yeah, Reuters. China's Xi gets nostalgic with, quote, old friend Kissinger. And then the highlighted part is, quote, the Chinese people never forget their old friends, and Sino-U.S. relations will always be linked with the name of Henry Kissinger. Xi Jinping told Kissinger at, they were meeting at this event for dignitaries. I mean, do you want it to be linked with the name of Kissinger? Because personally, I wouldn't so much. There we go. Yeah, there's a picture of them meeting together, the old friends. Kissinger, who is widely respected in China and has paid regular visits since leaving office, said that he was grateful Beijing had arranged the meeting in the building where he had met with Chinese leaders during his first visit. Quote, the relationship between our two countries is a matter of world peace and the progress of human society, China's official news agency, Xinhua, cited Kissinger as saying. And I can just hear all the Dungists like, yeah, it's like peace and prosperity. Do you really think Henry Kissinger is interested in human progress and peace? Are you insane? No, obviously that's not what this is about at all. So, you know what? I'll leave the chat where it is. Why don't we just go into the Kissinger thing right here? I think this is a good enough segue. So let me bring this up. All right, Henry Kissinger, The Man, the Myth, the War Criminal by Heather Mason, Red Spectre writer. And so this is found at the Red Spectre website. All right, so Henry Kissinger, The Man, the Myth, the War Criminal by Heather Mason, Red Spectre writer. So this is from a few months ago when Kissinger died at the age of 100. Henry Kissinger dead. On November 29th, 2023, Henry Kissinger, former U.S. Secretary of State and diplomat, passed away in his Connecticut home. Following his death, he was praised by global leaders across the world, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Notably, Chinese President Xi Jinping stated in a message to American President Joe Biden that, quote, Kissinger's name will always be associated with China-U.S. relations. Dr. Kissinger will always be remembered and missed by the Chinese people. You can just see the single tear forming in his eye. Unquote. Xi Jinping, November 2023. Henry Kissinger was a very influential man who had a large impact on global politics and international relations. So much, in fact, that even after he left office as Secretary of State, he still met with world leaders to discuss international relations, such as when, in July of this year, he met high-ranking Chinese politicians, including Xi Jinping, Defense Minister Li Shangfu, and senior diplomat Wang Yi. He is especially notable for his role in negotiating the opening up of China to diplomatic relations with the U.S. under the Nixon administration, and for negotiating a ceasefire in Vietnam, the latter of which he won a Nobel Peace for. Astounding. The latter of which he won a Nobel Peace Prize for. During his award ceremony, he stated, quote, I am deeply moved by the award of the Nobel Peace Prize, which I regard as the highest honor one could hope to achieve in the pursuit of peace on this earth. When I consider the list of those who have been so honored before me, I can only accept this award with humility. The people of the United States, and indeed of the whole world, share the hope expressed by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee that all parties to this conflict will feel morally responsible for turning the ceasefire in Vietnam into a lasting peace for the suffering peoples of Indochina. Certainly my government, for its part, intends to continue to conduct its policies in such a way as to turn this hope into reality. bro, you were literally killing them, like, en masse. I don't know, you know, how anybody takes this seriously. Obviously, they also gave Obama one of these for, like, literally doing nothing. All right. So, getting into the specifics here, here's Henry Kissinger's actual legacy. Cambodia. What the international representatives of the bourgeoisie are not telling you is that Henry Kissinger was in fact a war criminal who did anything but, quote, bring peace to the suffering people of Indochina. Henry Kissinger played a significant role in orchestrating the carpet bombing of Cambodia, which he directed between the years of 1969 to 73. Under Kissinger, 500,000 bombs were dropped on Cambodia, killing an estimated 150,000 civilians. Not only that, he personally approved 3,875 bombing raids in Cambodia. But that doesn't even scratch the surface of this man's complete and utter hypocrisy. Chile. Declassified documents from the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, also show that not only was Kissinger named supervisor of covert efforts to keep Salvador Allende from being inaugurated, he was also a major architect of the Pinochet coup, in which the Chilean military, under the leadership of Augusto Pinochet, bombed the Chilean presidential palace and overthrew the democratically elected Salvador Allende to establish a military dictatorship. By the way, if you're interested, we have 4 audiobooks from Salvador Allende on the channel, and they're pretty much like one from each year. It was like when he was running, when he first took office, when he was like a year or year and a half into office, and then his final speech just before he was assassinated, like when he was under siege. Very interesting. If you just do the Allende playlist, it'll take you through all 4. Also, there is an Enver Hoxha text that is called, I think it's called The Tragic Events in Chile, but just search on Chile and Hoxha and you'll find that one. It's actually a very good summary of the fruits of revisionism, because Allende got into office basically as a Marxist, but without doing Marxist-Leninist organizing or a revolution. They tried to do it purely through the bourgeois government and bourgeois democratic process. And what happened is they got fucking railroaded as soon as they actually got, you know, any serious transformative efforts underway. So highly recommend those audiobooks if you haven't listened to them already. Anyway, continuing. The imperialist that he was, when discussing the election of Salvador Allende in Chile with Richard Helms, former CI director, Kissinger said that, quote, "We will not let Chile go down the drain," unquote. It's from September 12, 1970. Said that on the phone. Kissinger later, in a memorandum to Nixon, acknowledged that Salvador Allende was legitimately elected. Quote, "Allende was elected legally, the first Marxist government ever to come to power by free elections. He has legitimacy in the eyes of Chileans and most of the world. There's nothing we can do to deny him that." But anyway, yeah, saying that this guy won fair and square, the population views his election as legitimate. I guess we just have to, you know, go assassinate him and then support like a fascist military coup to replace him. And that's because that's what they did. And so, again, this is one of the problems with the modern revisionist, reformist, Marxist current, or pseudo-Marxist current, because it just sets you up for this kind of failure. If you do an actual revolution, it tends to work better. But anyway. Yet caring little for democracy, that did not stop Kissinger from rapaciously backing up the military dictatorship in Chile. This great lover of world peace and human progress. In 1975, Kissinger showed his complete and utter lack of regard for human rights when he met the foreign minister of Chile's Pinochet regime. And rather than criticize the Pinochet government for human rights abuses, he had this to say, quote, "Well, I read the briefing paper for this meeting, and it was nothing but human rights. The State Department is made up of people who have a vocation for the ministry. Because there were not enough churches for them, they went into the Department of State." And Kissinger was like, I had to wear sunglasses. You know, the glare from their halos was just so fucking blinding. In 1976, he said to Pinochet that, quote, "My evaluation is that you are a victim of left-wing groups around the world. As you know, we are sympathetic with what you were trying to do here. I think that the previous government was headed toward communism. We wish your government well." It's Kissinger in June of 1976. How could you get more transparently disgusting than that? Bangladesh. During the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971, the war in which Bangladesh fought to achieve its independence from Pakistan, Pakistan employed brutal repression and genocide against Bangladeshis, in which 200,000 to 400,000 Bengali women were raped, 500,000 to 3 million Bengalis were murdered, and 1.5 million Bengalis were forced to seek asylum in India. How did Kissinger, then U.S. Secretary of State, respond? Alongside President Richard Nixon, Kissinger infamously supported Pakistan, pushing for an unprecedented and sharp turn toward friendly relations with Pakistan, as Kissinger saw Pakistan as a conduit for friendly relations with China. Beyond just words, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon used the United States Navy to support Pakistan. On December 10, 1971, Kissinger and Nixon sent the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet from Vietnam to Sri Lanka, led by the USS Enterprise, the then world's largest nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. He also facilitated the export of military supplies to Pakistan from Jordan, Iran, and Turkey. To showcase the full moral depravity of Kissinger in regard to the Bangladesh Liberation War, the following is an excerpt from a conversation between Nixon and Kissinger. Quote, Nixon bitterly said, "The Indians need, what they really need is a," Kissinger interjected, "they're such bastards." Nixon finished his thought, "a mass famine." That's quoting Gary J. Bass in The Blood Telegram, Nixon, Kissinger, and a Forgotten Genocide. So that's, this great lover of peace and human progress. What they really need is a mass famine, just genocide. So there you go. Israel. All right, so still in the news today. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Kissinger was still Secretary of State. Kissinger, however, did not approach this war from the perspective of principles or morals, for if he did, he would have recognized the right of the Palestinians to all of Palestine. As Israel was and still is a settler colonial state constructed entirely upon land stolen from Palestinians, that was and still is conducting an active genocide against the Palestinian nation. Rather, the opportunist that he was, he viewed it through the lens of the imperialist interests of the United States. In his words, quote, "We were determined from the beginning to prevent an Arab victory, which we looked at as a Soviet victory." It's quoting Kissinger in September 2023 in an exclusive Jerusalem Post interview. So I don't know how much more we need to hear about this guy describing who he is. Kissinger was in fact against a ceasefire. Wow, I wonder if anyone else is against a ceasefire in Palestine today. Kissinger was in fact against a ceasefire during the Yom Kippur War. The deranged gambler that he was, betting with blood and iron, he was unwilling to allow the war to end while the Zionists were down in material. I think they mean materiel, but anyway. In other words, he only opposed the ceasefire to double down in support for the genocidal army of Israel, feeding it tanks, bombs, guns, anti-aircraft weapons, all to double down in support for Israel with the ruthlessness of a mafioso and the bloodlust of a depraved sadist. Somehow the Soviet Union justly sending equipment to the Arab-Palestinian coalition is justification to support a genocidal army. But with criminals like Kissinger, this heartlessness is to be expected. Quote, "I was very opposed to reaching a ceasefire while the battle was going in favor of the offensive. We looked at it in part also as the impact on the international system of Soviet-armed countries gaining diplomatic benefits from military action." That's, again, that same interview from 2023. Kissinger did not respect the rights of the Palestinians. Rather, he took a dehumanizing view of them. His criticism of Israel did not include the forceful expulsion of Palestinians from Palestine, the Israeli annexations of Palestinian land, or the brutality of Israeli settler colonialism. Instead, his contention was that Israel's level of brutality and adventurism would set back Israeli strategic interests. So basically just saying, like, not now, guys, you're going to screw up your long game. This is because he sought to isolate the Palestinians from the Arab coalition, divide and conquer. Perhaps Kissinger simply prefers the practical and sensible genocide. So quoting Kissinger 1981 to isolate the Palestinians, "But I have left the Palestinian question alone in order to work on frontier questions, hoping eventually to isolate the Palestinians." And this could work. We could have split the Palestinians from the Syrians for only a few more kilometers on the Golan, but the Israelis insisted on moving the settlements right up to the line. My feeling now is that the Syrians will be driven toward even greater radicalism. Israel must realize that it must deal with the Arab governments if it doesn't want to deal with the Palestinians. But, Israel is a lot like Germany before the First World War in that there is this tendency to produce what it most fears. So he's not opposed to them. He's just saying that they're using bad strategy. During the Yom Kippur War, the United States airlifted 22,318 tons of material to Israel. This included weapons and military equipment, including 155 millimeter howitzers, 175 millimeter cannons, M60 and M48 battle tanks, Sikorsky CH-53D helicopters, and McDonnell Douglas A-4 Skyhawk aircraft fuselages. This airlift undoubtedly played a major role in the Israeli victory over the Palestinian people. Kissinger, with no shame, admitted to playing a major role in the U.S. airlift of these supplies to Israel. To quote Kissinger himself, quote, "When it became apparent that the civilian airlift could not be organized as quickly as we had originally thought, I went to Nixon and told him we needed another level of airlift to affect the situation. We needed a military airlift." And then Nixon, in his characteristic way, which was that once the decision was made, he did the full scale of it to the extent that it could be done. He ordered the immediate airlift for the Israelis, and we began a major military airlift on Friday evening and at full scale on Saturday morning. 2023 Jerusalem Post. In summary, Kissinger armed the Israeli occupation army against Palestine, sought to delay a ceasefire in order to strengthen Israel against the Soviet-backed PLO and Arab coalition, and acted opportunistically alongside U.S. imperialist interests in Israel as opposed to justice. Had Kissinger and the Nixon government he represented not intervened in Israel in the way that it did, an Israeli victory could have been prevented. The genocide and colonization of Palestinians could have been ended, and the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, in which Israel has murdered 17,400 people plus as of the time of this writing, Palestinians could have been prevented. East Timor. Henry Kissinger, during the years of the Gerald Ford administration, also played a role in greenlighting the Indonesian invasion of East Timor, which resulted in the East Timor genocide and 200,000 plus deaths. When Indonesian dictator Suharto, in a 1975 meeting with Kissinger and Ford, asked the United States to build a factory to manufacture M16 rifles for the Indonesian military to use, Kissinger said that, quote, "We would favor this as a government because of its indication of wider cooperation." That's quoting the Ford-Suharto meeting from December 1975. Kissinger, in fact, knew that the Indonesian government was planning action in East Timor, yet instead of warning the dictator against an invasion of East Timor or declaring a principled U.S. stance against Indonesian aggression, I'm not sure there is such thing. The U.S.'s only principle is literally just more profit as quickly as possible and, to be sustained as long as possible. He, in fact, encouraged the Indonesian dictator, with the caveat being that he only wished the dictator to wait until the president returns home on opportunistic grounds so as to manipulate American public opinion more easily in favor of Suharto. Kissinger could have even chosen to say and do nothing, merely ignoring it, but instead he actively encouraged Suharto to act quickly, becoming complicit in Suharto's crimes. See, quote, "It is important that whatever you do succeeds quickly. We would be able to influence the reaction in America if whatever happens after we return. This way there would be less chance of people talking in an unauthorized way. And, quote, if you have made plans, we will do our best to keep everyone quiet until the president returns home," unquote. As is consistent with Kissinger, he acted in the interests of the big bourgeoisie and private companies. And in few places does he make that as abundantly clear as when he personally spoke with Suharto. See Kissinger here, quote, "Our main concern is that whatever you do does not create a climate that discourages investment." That's what it is all about, folks. Basically, the matter is between you and the companies. We are not involved in such problems. Suharto replies, quote, "We have taken these views into account, and everything that we will do will be based on existing laws. We want to find a way of obtaining revenue which will not jeopardize fair profits for companies." Kissinger, "We appreciate your clarification of this matter," unquote. Kissinger is a warmongering profiteer, and the highest crimes in all the land, even genocide, is acceptable to him so long as it is in the interests of big business. Had Kissinger objected here, had Kissinger supported the East Timor people, then perhaps the East Timor genocide could have been prevented or alleviated. But no, Kissinger has no qualms with covering for genocide as long as it's in the interests of American imperialism. Argentina. In 1976, there was a military coup in Argentina, which established a dictatorial military junta. The Argentinian dictatorship, in an effort to repress political dissent, murdered or, quote, disappeared 30,000 people. They would keep pregnant prisoners under arrest until they gave birth, just to murder the mother and abduct their child. It was a horrible period in Argentina, characterized by political repression and fear. So naturally, of course, it comes as no surprise that Kissinger supported and encouraged the Argentinian government in the conducting of these repressions. At this point, it is hardly surprising, but in 1976, Kissinger blatantly stated to the Argentinian foreign minister that, quote, if there are things that have to be done, you should do them quickly, but you should get back quickly to normal procedures. And, quote, we are aware that you're in a difficult period. It is a curious time when political, criminal, and terrorist activities tend to merge without any clear separation. How convenient. We understand that you must establish authority. This is all from a 1976 Memorandum of Conversation. Kissinger even made it clear that he knew that the government was violating human rights and that the American public would be opposed to the U.S. supporting Argentina. Yet, of course, Kissinger once again makes it clear that he does not care about that when he says, quote, in the United States, we have strong domestic pressures to do something on human rights. We want you to succeed. We do not want to harass you. I'll do what I can. A CIA document transcribing Kissinger's briefing before this meeting shows that Kissinger was aware that Argentina was attempting to use the, quote, Chilean method when he said these things. But considering that Kissinger was an architect behind the Chilean fascist coup against the democratically elected Salvador Allende, it is no surprise that this would be of no concern to him. The innocent people of Argentina are just one more on the long list of the many lives that Kissinger has helped to ruin. Apartheid South Africa and Apartheid Rhodesia. In regards to Africa in general, Kissinger had a very typical racist and white supremacist perspective on the continent. For example, here is an excerpt from a conversation between Kissinger and Nixon. Quote, they've been going to put into Rogers' speech at the UN some stuff that we want more self-determination in Africa. And I said, absolute nonsense. Nixon replies, more self-determination would mean more nations. Kissinger, that applies. They'll apply that to Mozambique and South Africa. They won't apply it to black, and then something unintelligible. Nixon, yeah, goddamn, just think, 42 countries in Africa, 42 countries, that's ridiculous, unquote. Neither Kissinger nor Nixon respected the right of the African peoples to self-determination, which is typical for chauvinists like them. For context, and this is a fact that makes this all the sadder, is that today there are actually 54 United Nations recognized nations in Africa. Nixon and Kissinger, however, didn't seem to think then that these states have a right to exist. After the 1976 Soweto massacre, in which the apartheid South African government murdered 1,102 students and injured over 2,000, Henry Kissinger visited South Africa, becoming the first Secretary of State to do so in 3 decades. Kissinger also supported South Africa in the Angolan War and even Rhodesia. In a meeting with a South African diplomat, Kissinger demonstrated that he either believed that the apartheid government of South Africa either wasn't racist and reactionary, or that he at least wished the government could hide it better. When the diplomat became concerned that Kissinger was seeking South Africa to reform and share power with black Africans, Kissinger outright stated that he was not trying to reform the apartheid government of South Africa into giving political power to the black majority, but rather that he was trying to prevent apartheid South Africa from being forced to face a coalition of 46 African states, the Cubans, North Koreans, and Vietnamese. So, to Kissinger, quote, I have asked my foreign minister to make a statement supporting some elements of your speech and trip. Kissinger, if he could say something which would show that you are not totally reactionary, a totally reactionary racist state. Both, we have never shared power. Smith, in the Constitution, has. We are for a majority rule, but through separate states. We are for the same goal. Kissinger, we are not trying to reform you. We're trying to prevent the radicalization of black Africa and a race war. We want to avoid your having to face a coalition of 46 African states, supported by the Cubans, North Koreans, North Vietnamese, or whatever. 1976. Kissinger, in a report about South Africa, wrote that he wanted to relax political isolation and economic restrictions on white states without openly taking that stance, and that the U.S. government would be flexible in its attitude toward the apartheid Smith regime. Quote, this is Kissinger, "The whites are here to stay, and the only way that constructive change can come about is through them." You know, the people causing the repression. And, quote, "We would maintain public opposition to racial repression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions on the white states. We would begin by modest indications of this relaxation, broadening the scope of our relations and contacts gradually, and to some degree in response to tangible, albeit small and gradual, moderation of white policies." So they just want small and gradual moderation of the racist policies. Without openly taking a position undermining the UK and UN on Rhodesia, we would be more flexible in our attitude toward the Smith regime. And that's quoting from a December 9, 1979 study in response to a national security study memorandum. For those who don't know, Ian Smith was the Prime Minister of Apartheid Rhodesia, and these are the sort of people and governments that Kissinger saw it opportune to relax relations with and be flexible toward. Scoundrel. Conclusion. There is so much that could be said about Henry Kissinger, much that should be said. What I wrote about in this article only scratches the surface of Kissinger's complete and utter depravity, leaving a trail of bodies wherever he rests his hand, from Cyprus, Chile, Vietnam, Cambodia, East Timor, Argentina, South Africa, to Palestine. The list goes on and on. Kissinger has consistently prioritized the imperialist interests of the American bourgeoisie over democracy and human rights at every turn. The press about Kissinger, the legendary diplomat, as a great man of history, is a complete lie. Henry Kissinger is no more than an especially rapacious war criminal who ought to serve as an example for what evil is. Kissinger never received punishment for the crimes he committed. Now that he's dead, he never will. His victims will never receive justice. Kissinger was allowed to live to the ripe old age of 100, honored by the U.S. government, with his name intact and his back free against the wind. Henry Kissinger is a good example of how in the United States, any crime is acceptable so long as it's done on behalf of the bourgeois government. Because for as much culpability as Kissinger has for his own actions, he was just one cog in the machine of the U.S. bureaucratic military-industrial complex. Workers of the world unite. So thank you very much to the Red Spectre for hosting that, and to the author for sharing that link and suggesting it. That was a good article. I appreciate it. I'm sure that a lot of the listeners do as well.